I won't name names, but like you talk to very senior people in the AI world that are building this, and they say, look, if you don't do what the AI says, you're just being kind of silly and radical. You know, like basically AI is going to be better at everything than you. And so when you're living your life, like really what you should do is just be like, AI, what's next? Like, what's the next move? And this is exactly what Tocqueville feared. Of course, he never had the like concepts to kind of put it in AI terms. Then we end up as what you guys would call like NPCs or sheep, but what like Tocqueville would call the soft despotism. Hi, I'm Brendan McCord, founder and chair of Cosmos Institute, and I'm here to talk about a book that had a huge impact on my intellectual foundation, Constitution of Liberty. 3 years ago, I had my second of 2 kids, and I sold 2 AI companies. And at that moment, I tried to think about what I believed in, what I wanted to model for those little humans, and how I would spend the rest of my career. And this put me into a kind of philosophical search, the perennial search. And so I started with the ancients, I moved to the Enlightenment project, the American founding, modern debates. And this book in particular, Constitution of Liberty, is a really good kind of synthesis and forward look on what it takes to maintain a free society and how we drive broad prosperity. My favorite chapter in this, one I hold sacred, is called Creative Powers of a Free Civilization. And it's about how free societies work. It's about how they work from the bottom up.
Wanting to talk about Hayek specifically is something that I'm interested to see how this conversation goes.
Yeah, me too.
I'm Emma, and AI worries me, and I do think it might take over the world or we'll have a Black Mirror situation. So I'm interested in you changing my mind about that.
Great. Well, Emma has set the stage for a very optimistic talk about this. Okay, shifting over to Constitution of Liberty. So the book opens with a quote from Pericles, who's leader of Athens, and he's addressing the mothers of the Athenian dead. And he's essentially telling them why their sons died and what is the greatness of Athens for which they died. And he emphasizes that it's our commitment to freedom, to the rule of law, as well as our, I think he calls it like shared morality, some aspects of that. And it's a brilliant articulation, one of the first, of what it means to be a free society. The rest of the book can be thought of as being motivated by this because Hayek believes we need a restatement of those ideas for every successive generation. But I would frame it like this: if you were alive during the 18th century, the most important project would have been the philosophy to law pipeline. I see no one called it that, but taking ideas from Locke and Montesquieu and Smith and others and translating them into a constitutional system in America that still guides us today. So philosophy of law pipeline. If you're alive now, I think one of the most important projects can be thought of as a philosophy to code pipeline. So thinking about systems that mediate 20% of our waking life, AI systems, that the information we access is mediated by them, and thinking through what principles do we want to kind of guide this new world and these planetary scale systems. In particular, I want to just talk about creative powers of a free civilization. And this chapter is pretty sacred to me. It's chapter 2. He makes the case in this book that liberty is important because of its consequence. So it's a consequentialist argument for liberty. This isn't to say that Hayek only believes that that's the reason liberty is important, but this is the angle he takes. His statement is that if you just go up to someone and say that this is a presupposition that like this is important, then it's very hard to kind of convince them. If you just say like this is a good and we start at that and then we deduce from that X, Y, and Z. So he doesn't take that axiomatically. He proves why is liberty useful. And his basic frame is that justice for him is about the unknown person being able to attain his or her arbitrary ends. So he doesn't think we can know what your ends are, people who are my contemporaries. He certainly doesn't think we can know what the ends of somebody 10 years from now will be. And he thinks that by increasing the ability for people to attain those ends, that we've made progress, let's say. And so this is why so much of his thinking centers on the use of knowledge in society and the generation of knowledge in society. Because if that's what you believe the kind of goal is, then you want institutions that are capable of promoting the generation of knowledge and the dispersion of knowledge. You want habits of mind, I guess, and habits of action that promote it. And so it tilts towards in a kind of epistemological frame for that reason, I believe. That's an interpretive statement of what I'm saying there. And so what is liberty for him? Just briefly, liberty for him is a minimization of coercion. So he basically wants you to act independently, not be the instrument of another. He doesn't want others, particularly the government, to be able to put choices before you that mean that even when you do the lesser of two evils, you're still, the agent of another. The other key thing I think to define up front before we sort of talk about like the mechanism is what is knowledge. Hayek thinks that some knowledge is explicit semantic knowledge, so like scientific facts. He thinks some knowledge is more like, how do you ride a bike? That's a different kind of knowledge. And then he thinks also in this dimension, there's knowledge that is prior to our explicit semantic knowledge. So if anyone has read Kant, you'll be familiar with a priori or intuition. Kant basically says that in order to make sense of the world, we have concepts of time and space and causality that order our experience that are ineradicable. Like we can't take those things off, they're there. And in order for us to have any explicit knowledge, any scientific knowledge, we've already applied that somewhere deep, deep, deep in our mind. So for Hayek, it's things like riding a bike, dispositions, those things that kind of color our action, plus these like prior categories of knowledge. But it's a very important thing for him. He would say that actually the reason we act in the world is really significantly influenced by those kinds of things that we're not able to consciously manipulate. And if you're an entrepreneur, you recognize this, the way you spot an opportunity. If you're a diplomat, the way you read a room. These are key bits of knowledge and expertise. They're inarticulable though. And so he calls that the tacit dimension, or the adaptive dimension, I guess is still a further term, versus the explicit. Okay, now that we've got the definitions out of the way, so how does he think a free society works? Well, basically he starts by saying that if you're a society of one, well, you're not really a society, but if you're an individual, then the knowledge that you can use is kind of here, right? It may not be all consciously pictured by your intellect, but it's here, okay? But if you're in a civilization, if you're in a broader society, you're constantly using knowledge that you don't possess. It's a kind of ignorance, like the fraction of knowledge that you have versus the whole is vanishingly small in a society like 2025, America or the world. And so that's an interesting fact that actually one of the things that civilization provides to us is the ability to use a lot of knowledge that we don't have. He brings up this mathematician, Alfred North Whitehead, who has this great quote, stuck with me, about what civilizational progress even is. And he says that it's the ability to perform important operations of thought without thinking about them. So if we can do things without thinking about them because we're utilizing the knowledge of others, or we're utilizing technology that outsources what we would have otherwise had to think of, then that's very valuable. When I got up in the morning and I jammed a toothbrush in my mouth, it wasn't because I had reasoned from first principles about dental health. I was able to offsource that to a tool and a habit. And because I don't think about it, then I can apply my mind to other pursuits. So he says that this ability to push and use the knowledge elsewhere so that we can protect the cavalry charges in battle, is the way he terms it, is like these very important operations of thought that are glucose intensive and that we can't do so many of, then that's a great way to grow and reach higher and further. Another way to say this that Hayek frequently comes back to is knowledge is really something that's, a lot of which is dispersed and local. You each have a perception of your own abilities, of your own interests, of your own level of hunger, like all these things that are fundamentally not aggregable. Like I can't know those things, no central planner ever could, but they're really, really important. You know a lot of different things. You also have a contextual picture. And this is important, knowledge that that though it can't be aggregated, I could benefit in some way from that. The way Hayek thinks that I can benefit from it is if we have a kind of coordination mechanism, an impersonal coordination mechanism that allows you to use your knowledge, you to use your knowledge, you to use your knowledge in a way that kind of washes over all of us. And he says that the market is one of the ways in which we do that. Why is that the case? Well, it's the case because when we act in an economic situation, we are devising some end, like I'm thirsty, I want orange juice, I want to quench my thirst with citrus bliss or whatever. And that's my end. And then I try to attain it. And I have to do a kind of ordering of things. So I don't have infinite money. So I have to decide, like, do I want this, $12 orange juice thing, or do I want like a $2? Basically, Hayek thinks that whether it's the silly little thing of the orange juice or something much more important, the market is a way in which we're constantly trying to attain our ends. We're picturing ends and attaining them. And then we're finding little bits of collision because we can't all have all the things we want, right? The human mind can picture more than it can attain, certainly as a matter of like possibility. We know we can do that. And so then we have to kind of mutually co-adapt to one another. And if we all really want the orange juice, then the price is probably going to go up, which will be a kind of result of the coordination we had. And as that price goes up, bits of knowledge are getting transmitted through this very low bandwidth mechanism of price about how much we wanted that, how much that was one of our goals at the time. So acting in the world gives us a way to transmit knowledge, and it gives us a way to kind of equilibrate our plans. For Hayek, the mundane action like this is actually the most important thing, I would say. I mean, I think he believes that, coming up with the idea of what is the rule of law or what is a freedom maximizing principle, he would say that's very important. But he would say like a real way that knowledge grows is through the humble actions of anonymous individuals. So if you guys have ever read Mill, you'll know his articulation of liberty has a lot to do with speech. And Hayek's can be thought of as like an action counterpart to that. Both of them care about the other thing, like Mill would care about action as well, but Mill is primarily trying to say that like, the speech of one person in a million, for example, could be a crucial solution for society. And by inhibiting speech, we may never get that. So he talks about like the speech of these like different experiments in living, different marketplace of ideas as being a way to move towards truth. But only if you have wide access to diverse and competing views and lots of different things. Hayek similarly says we've got to have a protected sphere of action where we can all sort of take action, try things out, experience error, correct, and then share bits of that with one another. I want to say one other thing, and then I kind of want to like open it up to more discussions. So the other thing that I think he really emphasizes here, but throughout his work, is the idea of a spontaneous order. So he quotes Adam Ferguson, who's one of the early Scottish Enlightenment thinkers, who says that civilization is the product of men's action, but not our design. You could think of an anthill being this way too. There's not an ant that has a vision of an anthill. Like that just doesn't exist in the mind of an ant. Yet they create this elaborate anthill or whatever, right? How do they do it? Well, they act in a way that builds this thing up, and a higher level order emerges from their actions, but not from their design. So Hayek thinks that as our intellect pictures something that we go do, it then interacts with culture and tradition and society around us, the actions of others, to produce something that's different than what we thought it would produce. And then those things kind of interact and produce a higher level order. He then thinks that thing morphs over time, what that higher level order is. And he thinks that's how some of the best institutions evolve. When I say best, I mean the most knowledge-bearing. Things like the common law, which you can think of as a Scrabble board, building up over time and evolving to address problems that people encounter, real problems. Things like language, where nobody designs language other than like Esperanto, which fails because of the design, that gets imposed on it. So last thing I'll say is that in ancient Greek, there were two words for order: taxis, which is where you get taxonomy, it's the top-down order, and then cosmos, which is the evolutionary, adaptive, more organismic order that you see in language and the common law and things like that. And this was a big part of why I named the organization Cosmos, was to think about the possibility of bottom-up solutions in society and so forth.